Len VK3FB, and I've got a little bit of something to read out for you about you there, Len. His subject tonight is portable superlight antenna for portable use, e.g. or for example soda operation. And Len's background: Len was a radio training officer in the Army at Watsonia. Did I meet you a few years ago, Len? Some anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the Signals Corps? No, something like that. Okay.
I'll make the corrections to your wording.
You make the corrections, will you? Okay. Yeah. Now, where was I up to? Yeah, Len was a radio training officer at the Army. In the Army at Watsonia, which included teaching CW and then a university lecturer in electronics. Len has some very different ideas, and this particular antenna includes 40 metres up to 10 metres, including the WARC bands. Members would know that Len has in the past gone out of his way to assist us with some HF design of HF antennas. So Len, I'd like to get you to come up the front now. I'm going to have to change the mic over, so I'll turn it off for a minute and just mic Len up. And then put your hands together and for Len VK3FB.
My role at Watsonia for 3 years was as the second in command of an organisation called 126 Signal Squadron Special Forces. It was a lunatic organisation. Had very little to do with the rest of the signals world, and it was the sort of place that people got into and didn't want to get out of, wasn't it, Jim? Where did I meet you? I was reminded of my first attendance, and I didn't belong to the Corps of Signals, and the officer in command took me for a walk around and took me into the Morse training room. And in my transport guise, I sat down and listened to the Morse session and made comments later about how good it was. And that got some interest. Officers apparently aren't supposed to know how to use Morse, but some of them do. So a few things about me. That was 1972 late or 73 early, plus 3 years. Several quick things about me. I've had an amateur licence since I was 16, so I'm a child of the first half of the last century. My licence has been running now for more than half of the time that amateur radio has been in existence. I think I'm getting old. I've done that a long time ago. And you might query the use of the word getting. Okay, I'll accept that. I became a radio trades apprentice, I think at 8 or 17 or thereabouts. The highlights had me with the radio branch of the PMG for a period. It's now called by another name, which is called ACMA, I think. The boss at that stage was a gentleman called Horry Young. You've probably heard of him if you know a bit about Australia's trip to Singapore to destroy Japanese shipping. And he was the radio operator on board the crate.
So I'll keep going.
I'll keep going.
Yeah, just
highlights. I was highlighting. I joined the Army Reserve in 1962, and they kicked me out 30 years later to the day. And I went to teaching, and I taught at what is now called Victoria University. There's someone here that might confirm that. I did run an amateur radio class, both theory and Morse, for quite a while, right up until they didn't want to let me do it as my normal workload, and that came to a grinding halt. And that's probably enough to get you to where I am today. I would like to talk about my antenna subject, which is what really brought us here, and lightweight means different things to different people. So what I'm going to do is have lots of things to pass around. If you like to cram up a bit, it'll make passing easier. If they can be put in the far corner where they come to rest, that'll be good. I'll take that too. Some people will recognise a bag of that colour. It was of American origin, but it has a lightweight field antenna kit inside it. That is one half of the dipole antenna. It's an amazing bit of wire if you could have a close-up look at it. It seems to be made of incredibly fine stainless steel which has bronze threaded through it. I reckon it'd be great for what we do. But that's half of the dipole antenna. You might like to whip it around. And there are a whole lot of other bits in there that you might look at later. But one thing that's interesting is innovation. Americans are good at it. You may have seen a tape measure like this. This one is calibrated in feet in a decimal form. So the feet are in tenths. There is a formula that you probably all know well. It's that 246 over the frequency in megahertz. And if you can't cope with that and you pull it out far enough, the tape measure is calibrated alternately. Where is it? Here we go. Starting at 20 megahertz for a quarter of a wavelength. And you keep reeling it out and you can go all the way down to 2 megahertz. I think I might say megacycles, which gives you an idea of its age. It's part of the equipment known as the EMDRC 109 set, which was in use in Australia, I think, from about 1968 or thereabouts until 1992. A 400 watt single sideband portable set that worked off 28 volts. Not a bad piece of kit if you find one. I've had great use from it. Oh, you better have a look. It's a tape measure, but it's calibrated differently. So things that are lightweight to some people are not particularly lightweight to others. So I'd like to introduce you to my green box. I'll have to cut through the screen, sorry. Where would you like it? Is that good enough? Do you want up closer? Okay. It's a scrap box. It's made of things that were lying around. The box itself is throwaway ply that I picked up on the side of the road near my place of employment. And then it's got some other things. It's got some poly conduit that I stole from the electrician down the way. It's got that on the sides. It does house 2 sale-priced squid poles. And if you go to the big green shed, you'll see they have these sort of things. And I don't think I could make one for the $28 I paid for this one. You might think otherwise. You might be really good engineers. It came with a cutting device on the top and a string. And it cost 28 bucks. And I thought, I'm not going to make one of those at that price. So that's part of my magic box. That's the VHF plus part. And the original, what's in it? Antenna tuner that I had, and a rather antique radio that I bought brand new. Yes, I did say that before. It's a IC 730. Still works okay. When it's not in here, it lives in the vehicle. And I do have something else at home. And it's got 2 gel batteries at the bottom, and I think with a total of about 50 amp hours. And I think it's got an extension speaker and a current meter and voltage meter that was lying around. I found after I installed it, it draws more current than the radio needs to, so it gets turned off and on as required. And that's about what it has. And the original plan was for 2 squid poles to 45 degrees didn't work. It used up too much of the box, so 35 degrees, and that was going to be a V antenna as opposed to an inverted V antenna. Wire wrapped mildly around the squid poles, they're about 9 metre poles I think, and connected directly into the high impedance output of the tuner, and it worked like a charm on the face of it. But I wasn't all that impressed. It didn't seem to be as good as I wanted it to be. But it did work, and it worked from 80 metres to 10 without any trouble. And I thought about it for a while, and I came to my senses about a week later, and I produced another bit of wire. So there are now 3 bits of wire. This one, that one, and one that links across the top. And lo and behold, it became a delta antenna. So 14 metres I think across the top and 8 or 9 on each leg. And lo and behold, it's got some directional characteristics, and I suspect a bit of gain from 20 metres and up. How do you get to link things together quickly? Where is it? That's the entire package of wire for the delta loop. So there are 3 bits of wire wrapped on that. I'll pass it round. You'll see that one of my primary sources of product for building is called core flute. Do you understand core flute? Yep. Or alternatively, do you understand the signs that go outside of places that are for sale? I do. Slow movement for the camera. It's a marvellous building material. I'll go into it later. Jim, do you recognise the colour of that piece of core flute? It was yellow on one side and had some black markings on the other, and it was approximately 4 foot square. No? I think it may have been. It may have been. I'll pass it round and you can have a look. There are some bits and pieces hanging off it that you'll also notice when you get up close. Connecting it together easily with fishing tackle. I will pass the packet around if you want to identify the packet, but 10 of them cost about $3. So that's all of the wire for the delta antenna. You'll definitely recognise the string. The string is over-engineered. It came on a 1,000-metre roll, I think, and was incredibly cheap. Can't remember where I got it. You don't need cord that big, you really don't, but I have it, and I'm not going to buy some of the cheaper equivalents. So I've got a number of those that go on the ends and extend and give me extra reach. And so that's where that box started. But of course, having the poles at angles is one thing. It also provides me with a lovely basis for, squid poles don't come with lumps on them like that, but they have a lump at that end, and they were rather rattly. So I got some duct tape and I built the diameter out to almost the right one to make it a neat fit, and then I heat shrank it into one place. So it looks reasonably neat, and now it fits without rattling. And here we go with a, whoops, lost the end. A lot of the references that I've had to using squid poles explain that you don't use the top 2 sections because they're rather fragile and don't carry a load very well. Well, what we've come up with so far is not a problem. The antennas that I have made that are of the dipole ilk can be used right to the top, and I have put a stainless steel split ring on, another thing that I got from a pretty well-known fishing organisation. Where is it? There we go. I'll pass those around and you'll identify the components that I've used, and the split rings I think are the most expensive part, but they do make fast connects and disconnects really easy. So we got to look for a dipole. The first bit of wire that I started with for all of thus far was a scrap, I think, of 7 core flex that somebody had left over from installing roller doors. And I stripped it and we got some fine wire out of it. So it's a little bit harder, but it's about the same diameter and cross-sectional area as conventional hookup wire. So that's the product that I've used in the main until I ran out. If you have a particular football club, you can go with club colours now. That is about $10 or $12 per 100-metre roll. I got it from Electus. J-Car is the same shop. So it's almost the same calibre as what I started with. But you can make one heck of a lot of antennas from 100 metres of it. I hear people using coax feed for a 75 ohm antenna, and there are other heavier things around, but the wire got my interest, and I did some calculations and found that if I was to twist two of those together tightly with an electric screwdriver, it calculated impedance comes out to about 100 ohms. It doesn't weigh much, you get the idea when I pass it round. Some people have said, well, that's a fair way away from 75. It is no further away from 75 than 50 years. So it will create a very small SWR even if it was at 100. I think someone measured at 110. My Gesso calculation said about 100. So that's just a piece of the twisted wire which has an actual...
And what do you use this for?
That's the feed line. That's the transmission line. And if it's wrapped loosely around the squid pole, there's no loading on it, it'll stand up pretty straight in a stiff breeze. Well, it'll lean ever so slightly in a stiff breeze. There's no kinking, there's no major movement. I don't guy it, I only support it with the dipole itself. So transmission line, and now for some insulators and the other bits. This is the very first one, and it's done its job fairly well. A bit hard to see because I chose some nasty colours, but that's the transmission line. And that's the centre insulator. And the insulators are all sections of 20mm electrical conduit sawn off. So a reasonably thick one in the centre and much thinner ones along the way. The links are made from JD terminals, male and female terminals that normally go together to make a plug or socket assembly. And I've soldered them on and I've heat shrunk them to give them a bit of support, and they just hang in space until you link them together. But I'll pass it round. Have a go at linking one of them. They're easy enough to get at. That one is linked. And it says 10 metres because they all look alike in the dark. I've written the frequency or the wavelength on, and it's now not linked, so it doesn't take very long to achieve. You'll get the idea of the weight, and you'll see some more yellow core fluid. But that's the whole assembly. Not particularly heavy.
Bands does that cover?
40, all the work bands down to 10. Sorry.
40, 30, 15?
Yeah, the whole bit. And that's being fairly generous, but I thought, well, I'm going to make this one, and it works. I left 80 out of it because there's a heck of a lot of extra wire. There's as much wire as is already there just to get 80, and not many people want to stay up on a hilltop overnight and play 80. But it is taken care of because of the fast linking. You can unlink the green cord and link in a pair of extra bits which resonate at 80, depending on how far up the far end will be. So that is the extra weight of the add-ons to give you 80 metres as well. I love fine heat shrink. It just makes those little terminals all come together really well. I love heat shrink. It's beaut for hiding my knots, which are not of high quality, but they won't come undone once they've been heat shrunk. So there's really basic little bits and pieces that hold it together. I didn't design any of this, truly, it was all stolen. The shape of the coil winders I found on a Soda Site website that was explaining that you can buy them for a few pounds each, and they were made out of some plastic material. Theirs were heavier than mine, but that's where the shape came from. And the beauty of doing that wind is that you don't get twists. And it'll flake off as you walk away without having to do any more than shake it. So it's good and fast, and it works. Just me find myself. I know where I am. But still, all of that's fairly lumpy and heavy, and most people would be happy with perhaps 2 bands, 20 metres and 40, and that'll make the project a bit seriously lighter. So using similar techniques, but told you I found out about core flute, using core flute as the insulators rather than poly. This is the 2-band model. What you're looking at is the centre insulator, hanging down as the feed line, and 20 and 40 only, with simple pieces of core flute which allow you to punch holes and thread wire to make strong connections without big kinks. And again, JD pins, open link, closed link, and that is 80 and 40, and that's starting to cut the weight down fairly well. Enter Marshall. Talking to Marshall, staying somewhere up in the bush with his fairly famous antenna. What's it called, Marshall?
A non-resonant broadside doublet.
A broadside doublet. The first amateur that I met up close was a gentleman about my age when I was 14 in Bendigo. It was VK3JW Tom. And I went to his shack, which was at the back of the house, and I looked out through the window which had 2 holes fixed in it for insulators to carry a high impedance transmission line, and out in his backyard I suspect there was a non-resonant 20 odd feet aside doublet fed with a transmission line that was spaced about that. And I always thought that was a fairly ordinary sort of an antenna until relatively recently, thank you Marshall. Marshall's is 22 feet either side, and so I built one. And it was a heavy duty one, and I used 40mm poly conduit cut into thin slices as insulators. You'll see how it works in a while, but that was a big one. And it was heavy, and it's still hanging up where I put it, and gee, it works. It needs to have a tuner. Well, my box has got a tuner, and it just is something that I can use quickly. So I need a lightweight version of that. The materials haven't changed, but the impedance has. That is calculated, and I haven't measured it, but that calculates at about 575 ohms characteristic impedance. Marshall uses 300 ohm ribbon, but I made this one, and it was interesting. It took a long time. It probably wasn't cost effective, but I did make it. Sorry, that's an add-on. That's the 22 foot aside, and in this case the centre insulator is a piece of plastic tubing. I was cunning and I've held it together with some clear heat shrink, so when it's passed around you'll be able to see the simple multiple folds through the tubing that lock the cable in place. The transmission line. The transmission line is terminated with another one of those JD plugs I mentioned. This time it's got a housing, so there is a male and a female, and it makes for fast connecting and disconnecting, and there is some degree of retention, so it won't fall apart in the wind. It does lock to a degree. And lots of people told me that doublets work better if they're 44 feet long. I've got to say, they're a lot more awkward when they're that long, aren't they, Marshall? Almost twice as awkward, maybe more. However, it doesn't matter if it twists, it untwists very quickly. So, for very little effort, you can have, that's one of the extensions. I've made 2 extensions, and using the same quick link-up procedures, you can make it twice as long. And doesn't weigh much, doesn't have to be used, can be left in the car if you're looking for super weight saving. More core flute, more hookup wire, more fishing tackle, and I think that one has got one of the split rings on the end to make fast connect for the for the cord. I mentioned the core flute before. I've found that it makes a fairly exciting building material, except that you can't glue to it. And so cable ties and duct tape become the fastening methods. You've seen part of what I came up with. It also makes rather fancy transit cases. Secreted away in this one there is a Argonaut, but it does, sorry, better. Cable ties hidden under the duct tape. It's there for the duration. It didn't cost a whole lot, but it does make the contents rather shock-proof and bulletproof. Cost, well, didn't really. You've probably seen the insulators that I produced for the feed line. They're thinner versions of what was used for the sections of the first antenna. They're a bit fiddly and boring to make, but fiddly and boring, that's okay. They've been drilled, cut off. I did cut off a few with a hacksaw and found that it worked. It didn't look pretty. And then I found out that one of my neighbours in the factory across the road has got a beautiful little docking machine, and we went docking. And these things were flying all across his factory. I found most of them, but they tended to take off at a rate of knots under the wrong circumstance. But you can get a hell of a lot of them out of a metre of conduit. I've used a fair few. I'm not sure of the spacing on that high impedance transmission line. They are spaced exactly the same distance as the lump of wood I used as a measure. But they're all the same. I'm not suggesting that anyone would want to make any of the things that I've made, and that wasn't the intention. That just happens to be a template of the winders. And on my photocopier, I can make them bigger and smaller with ease. I do have plenty of core flute if anyone can't find signs pointing to places that are for sale or buildings that are going to be built. But it does come in different grades. And as I pointed out to someone else this evening, if you want a very good spacer for high impedance transmission line, where did I put mine? Oh, looks like someone's stolen it already. Oh, there it is, hiding. If you can imagine that the edge of this has got absolutely ripper spaced slots for you to feed wire through, you can dock it off, cut it off with a pocket knife, and have a beautiful collection of spacers for any impedance you would like to calculate. If it slides on your wire, yes, you'll have to use some of those really cheap cable ties just to clinch it, stop it sliding. But not expensive, not heavy, doesn't seem to be affected very much by solar activity. They do last a long time in the weather. So a really cheap building material, weighs very little. Matching. Where I need to match unbalanced to the balanced feed line, I've used one of these little ugly ballons. I had some of that very fine 50 ohm coax. I've joined two bits together. I don't know that I want to describe how I joined it together, but a very kindly gentleman called Wing Commander Reynolds, who was the soldering and mechanical instructor at RMIT's Building 9 in 1958, showed me how to do it. Did you know him too? Bugger. I had thought more was going to be better than not enough. And that's the JD connector that's at the end of the transmission line. So that was scrap, had it been cut off a piece of coaxial cable previously. So it really was scrap. It's a male end of B and C. Just a one-to-one, oh well, it works as a one-to-one balance. I think that probably, oh no, there might be. That's the size of the insulator spacing the heavy-duty 600 ohm transmission line. I think by calculation it's probably good for about 3 kilowatts. I don't have 3 kilowatts, but at 600 ohms there isn't very much current. Lots of voltage, but probably not that much. But that's what I used for the high-powered version. I've got a couple of rubbish-made ballons. Well, I'll say that one's a ballon, made out of bits and pieces. That gives me a 4-to-1 match from the transmitter into the high impedance feed line. No, it's not perfect, but it works. And a 9-to-1 un if I want to run a bit of long wire. So that's just about the collection of bits. I don't know how many of you perhaps would play regularly with shifting 7 amp hour LSA cells around. You do.
I've recently converted.
You've converted to something lighter and more expensive.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, just in case you didn't know, I know Jim will. One of our official organisations provides little boxes like that for people to carry magazines for Steyr F88 rifles. And I've got to tell you, I think they made them for batteries. Won't get much of a better fit than that if you need to suspend them on a belt or add them to other packs. And I think you can find them at a place called Aussie Disposal. But about as close as a design fit could ever be by pure happen chance. Other than the more practical approach, it takes about 5 minutes to get those on the air, and if anyone would like to hang around later, I'd be happy enough to fire it up out in the car park. It doesn't take very long. But other than asking if you've got any questions that are deep and meaningful, that's my ideas of what lightweight antennas happen. Fire away.
Do you ever have any problems with RF feedback?
No, but thank you for... I did make a note of something that I skipped over or I didn't say. I will say it. It's not RF feedback. It's worse. When you're sitting there tuning up and you find that your eyes start to burn, there is probably something else at play. Even at low power, at the bottom of the delta, your body is incredibly close. So tune up at low power, it's probably not a problem when you're using voice and single sideband, or perhaps even Morse code, but to run constant carrier, your head is in the cooking zone even at low power levels. So electromagnetic radiation is something to be aware of. When I was teaching, I came across the description of a magnificent antenna demonstration kit made by Marconi, and I put in a bid for it and someone came up with the money for me, and it was magic kit. You could build vertically stacked type gain antennas, you could build Yagi type antennas out of it, and it was easy to measure and see how directional and what gain was available. And it ran at about 115 megahertz at a power level I think of about 6 watts. And I got excited and introduced it to the class, and we played with it from 8 o'clock in the morning until the morning tea break. And by then my eyes were burning. And I had morning tea and came back into the classroom and thought about it, and my eyes were fine. Before I turned it back on, I said to the class, did anyone have burning eyes earlier? And 3/4 of them said they did. And I haven't used it since. You did need to run it at reasonable power to get that effect, to be able to use it. And it had a lot of energy hanging about where people were. So that was something I did intend to mention. So haven't had any RF feedback any other way. No one's complained about quality of audio or anything like that, but that is probably more important as an individual to be aware of. Someone else down the front had a question?
Just a question on the smaller insulators that you made, docking and offset,
Yes.
straightforward, but I noticed you drilled this way. How did you manage to do that?
Carefully. I clamped it in the vise and drilled radially,
Yes, and then,
and with the revs going, tilted the drill.
yeah, okay, so it's mucking around is the answer.
Mucking around. But it worked quite well. Yeah.
They were in a hurry to get away on Friday night. Rolled the bolts and rifle serial numbers did not match up.
I didn't know that. No one told me.
They never match up with your super.
Oh, they did. Yeah, sort it out when you get there. Oh, it was a long time ago. Statute of limitations. And they were found by a little girl walking after the reservoir was very low. Found one, found them all. So, not quite an urban myth. But thank you very much for listening to the story.
Thanks very much, Jim. Now, before you
I knew what you meant.
did anyone else have any more questions for Jim? Our uplink monitor, monitoring any signals going, or the vision going up, the vision coming down, mixing board over there, and the audio mixer over there as well. And then, oh yeah, I think you can see that. It's probably way behind on VOTC.
It's about 2 minutes out now.
Yeah.
Did you show them my new video mixer?
And then if we go across to the other side of the room there, David, we've got another camera over there, and that one over there has been recording for the evening. So, and I'm also, I think, recording at home, I hope. I set my DVR up at home to record the session tonight. Oh, yeah, the microphone.
Speak any.
Okay. So how you going there, Damien? You ready?
Nearly done.
Nearly done. Machines going in there as well if you want a real coffee as opposed to the jar coffee. All right. Thank you very much, Len. Again, for coming tonight. We'll turn you off. And good evening to everyone that's on VATC and on ACV Direct.